Ferrari may have just found the one move that can hurt Mercedes without even passing them on track. Because George Russell's Austrian pole was not just fast. It was fragile. Verstappen crashed at turn 9. Yellow flags came out. Antonelli backed out. Leclerc was waiting for Ferrari's moment. And then Russell crossed the line fastest, turning what should have been a Mercedes celebration into a full-blown question mark. Now Ferrari wants the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile to look again. And that is where everything changes. Because if the investigation is reopened, Russell is not only defending a lap time. He is defending his reputation, Mercedes' credibility, and the dangerous split inside his own garage. One Mercedes driver chose caution. One Mercedes driver took the reward. And Ferrari may have just forced everyone to ask the question Mercedes fears most. Did Russell win pole because he was brilliant, or because the yellow flag rule gave him a loophole? If the stewards look again and find even one detail Mercedes cannot explain, this could become more than a penalty. It could become the crack that turns a championship fight into a Mercedes civil war. Subscribe to the channel. The first thing that makes this situation so dangerous is that Ferrari does not need to prove Russell did something outrageous. They only need to prove the original answer was not complete. That is the nightmare for Mercedes. Because once a team asks the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile to look again, the story changes shape. It is no longer just a pole lap. It is no longer just a moment of confusion after Verstappen's crash. It becomes a question of whether the first review missed something, whether the standard was too soft, and whether Mercedes benefited from an interpretation that Ferrari believes should never have survived. That is why this is not only about George Russell. It is about the credibility of the decision. And credibility is everything in Formula One. A lap time can be brilliant. A driver can be calm. A team principal can defend the result. But if the paddock starts to believe there is another layer of evidence, the celebration disappears. Suddenly, Mercedes is not leading the story. Mercedes is reacting to it. And Ferrari knows exactly how powerful that is. Because Ferrari does not have to say Russell ignored the yellow flag completely. That would be too easy to dismiss if the data shows any lift at all. The sharper argument is much more dangerous. Did he slow enough? Did he lose enough time? Did he gain, or protect, an advantage in the one part of the lap where safety should have mattered more than pole? That word, enough, is where the whole controversy lives. And it is the word Mercedes cannot escape. The Red Bull Ring gave this story the perfect setting, because the lap is short, the margins are tiny, and the final sector can change everything in seconds. Russell's pole came at the end of a chaotic qualifying finish, with Verstappen crashing at turn 9 and yellow flags appearing right when the fastest laps were being completed. For most fans, the image is simple. A crash happened. A warning appeared. Antonelli backed out. Russell went fastest. That sequence is why Ferrari's pressure feels dangerous, even before any official new ruling exists. Because the emotional version of the story is stronger than the technical explanation. Mercedes can talk about single yellow flags. They can talk about a lift. They can talk about speed reduction. They can talk about stewarding procedure. They can say the first review already settled the matter. But Ferrari can point to something much easier for the public to understand. One Mercedes driver abandoned the lap. The other took pole. That contrast is brutal. And it gives Ferrari a weapon that pure pace could not give them. Because Charles Leclerc was close to a major moment. Ferrari had a chance to turn Austrian qualifying into a statement. Hamilton was in the mix. Mercedes was not untouchable. Red Bull had already made its own mistake through Verstappen's crash. Then Russell's lap changed the timing screen. And when a rival loses pole in a moment involving yellow flags, that rival will not simply walk away. Ferrari's anger, or pressure, or demand for a second look, comes from that exact wound. They do not just feel beaten. They feel beaten in a way that can be questioned. That is much more dangerous. Because Formula One teams can accept defeat when the gap is obvious. They can hate it, but they can accept it. A faster car, a cleaner lap, a perfect sector, that is painful but simple. But losing to a lap that passes through a yellow flag zone creates a different feeling. It creates suspicion. And suspicion makes teams dig. They look at the timing. They compare sectors. They examine where the yellow flag began. They study whether the driver's speed reduction was truly clear, or just barely enough to satisfy the first look. They ask whether the driver gained by not backing out as much as others. And if Ferrari believes there is a gap in the explanation, then Mercedes is in a terrible position. Because defending a result is harder than celebrating one. When a team wins cleanly, the story is simple. When a team wins under review, the story becomes fragile. Every sentence matters. Every word from Russell matters. Every word from Toto Wolff matters. Every phrase in the stewarding decision matters. And if Ferrari pushes hard enough, the conversation shifts from what Russell did well to what the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile may have missed. That is exactly what Mercedes does not want. Mercedes wants Russell to look like a driver in command. Ferrari wants him to look like a driver protected by a gray area. Those are completely different stories. And in Formula One, stories can change pressure before the race even begins. Russell's problem is that this yellow flag debate does not land on empty ground. It lands on a history people remember. Earlier in his career, Russell was punished for not slowing sufficiently under double yellow flags. That does not prove anything about Austria. It does not mean he broke the rule this time. It does not replace the need for evidence. But it changes the reaction. Because fans and rival teams do not forget patterns. They may not quote the full stewarding document. They may not remember every detail. But they remember the feeling that Russell has been in yellow flag trouble before. So when another yellow flag question appears, it feels bigger. It feels like a story returning. And Ferrari knows that. Ferrari understands that a reopened investigation would not just reopen a lap. It would reopen Russell's reputation under pressure. That is the real danger for Mercedes. Because Russell needs authority inside his own team right now. He needs Mercedes to see him as the driver who can deliver clean, decisive results. He needs to fight back against the rise of Kimi Antonelli, who is no longer just a promising teammate. Antonelli is a real championship threat, and his presence changes the weight of every Russell moment. A clean pole would have helped Russell massively. It would have said, I can still lead this team. It would have said, I can still deliver when the pressure is at its worst. It would have said, do not crown the future before I have finished fighting for the present. But a disputed poll says something more complicated. It says Russell was fast. But now the team has to defend how. And that is not the same kind of power. Inside Mercedes, the Antonelli comparison is impossible to avoid. The source context around this qualifying controversy makes the contrast clear. Antonelli backed off when the yellow appeared. Russell did not abandon the lap completely. He managed it, kept going, and took the reward. That difference may be legal. It may even be tactically brilliant. But emotionally, it is dangerous. Because Antonelli can look like the driver who protected the team from risk, while Russell looks like the driver who placed the team in the middle of a fight. That is the version Ferrari would love to amplify. Not because Ferrari cares about Mercedes' harmony. Because Mercedes' harmony is a competitive weapon. If Ferrari can disturb it, Ferrari gains. A top team is not only fast because of its car. It is fast because the garage knows what it is doing. The drivers trust the rules. The engineers trust the drivers. The team principle controls the message. Everyone moves in the same direction. A reopening demand threatens that unity. Suddenly, the team has to answer different questions. Was Russell too aggressive? Was Antonelli too cautious? Should Mercedes praise the lap or distance itself from the risk? Should the team say the rules were followed, or admit the optics were uncomfortable? And what happens next time both drivers see a yellow flag during a decisive lap? That last question matters most. Because Formula One drivers learn from what gets rewarded. If Russell keeps pole after managing a single yellow, that teaches one lesson. If Antonelli loses out because he backed off completely, that teaches another. And in a title fight, lessons turn into behavior. Next time, the cautious driver may take more risk. Next time, the aggressive driver may push the interpretation again. Next time, Mercedes may have two cars in the same gray area instead of one. That is how one controversy can create future problems. It does not end when the original lap is confirmed. It becomes part of the team's internal memory. And Ferrari's pressure makes that memory sharper. Because every time the story is repeated, the contrast becomes clearer. Antonelli backed out. Russell took pole. Ferrari wants another look. Mercedes has to defend. That is not the rhythm of a calm championship leader. That is the rhythm of a team under stress. And stress is exactly what Ferrari needs to create. Ferrari's season depends on finding openings. Mercedes has been strong. Russell and Antonelli have kept the team at the front. Ferrari cannot rely only on hoping Mercedes slows down. They need to make Mercedes uncomfortable. They need to force Mercedes into decisions. They need to turn clean weekends into complicated ones. A yellow flag investigation is perfect for that. Because it is not only about competition. It is about safety. And safety changes the tone of every argument. If Ferrari says, Russell took pole unfairly, people may hear normal rivalry. If Ferrari says, the yellow flag standard was not properly applied, people listen differently. Because nobody wants safety rules to become flexible. Nobody wants a crash zone to become a performance opportunity. Nobody wants drivers calculating the smallest possible lift while another car is in trouble. That is why Mercedes cannot brush this off too aggressively. They have to show respect for the process. They have to show respect for the rules. They have to show respect for the danger that created the yellow flag in the first place. But at the same time, they have to protect their driver. That balance is extremely hard. Defend too much, and you look arrogant. Apologize too much, and you make the pole look guilty. Stay quiet, and the rival narrative grows. That is how Ferrari can make Mercedes uncomfortable even without a confirmed penalty. The threat itself becomes pressure. And this is where the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile is pulled into the center of the storm. A governing body cannot make decisions based on public anger. It has to use the rulebook, the evidence, the telemetry, and the exact status of the flag shown in the marshal sector. But public trust still matters. If fans believe yellow flags are being interpreted too softly, the official explanation becomes harder to accept. If teams believe one driver gained from danger, the paddock becomes harder to calm. If drivers believe the safest choice is punished while the calculated choice is rewarded, future behavior becomes harder to control. That is the real risk. Not just for Russell. For the entire grid. Because every stewarding decision sends a message. It tells drivers where the line is. It tells teams what can be defended. It tells rivals what can be challenged. If Russell's lap stands without a reopening, the message may be that a controlled lift under single yellow is enough, even in a chaotic final sector after a crash. If the investigation is reopened, the message may be that yellow flag laps remain vulnerable if rivals can produce a stronger comparison. Either way, the grid is watching. And that is why this story has much more weight than a normal qualifying dispute. It is a reference point. Ferrari can use it now. Mercedes will have to remember it later. Russell will feel it every time a yellow flag appears near one of his decisive laps. Antonelli will remember that his cautious choice cost him a chance while Russell's choice brought pole and controversy. And the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile will know that the next case will be measured against Austria. That is how Formula One builds pressure. One incident becomes the standard. One standard becomes the argument. One argument becomes a season-long storyline. And Russell is now standing right in the middle of it. For him, the personal stakes are enormous. A pole position should be one of the clearest forms of validation a driver can get. It tells the world that for one lap, under maximum pressure, nobody was better. But when a pole is threatened by a yellow flag debate, the validation changes. It becomes conditional. Fastest, but questioned. Pole, but reviewed. Brilliant, but controversial. That is a dangerous label. Because Russell does not want to become the driver everyone watches for gray area moments. He wants to become the driver Mercedes can trust when the championship is on the line. Those are not the same thing. And Ferrari's push threatens to move him from one category toward the other. Mercedes will try to stop that. They will emphasize the data. They will emphasize the original decision. They will emphasize that Russell reacted and that the lap was allowed to stand. That is the only logical defense. But logic does not always erase emotion. And the emotion around Austria is strong because the visuals were strong. A Red Bull in trouble. A yellow warning. A Ferrari opportunity. A Mercedes teammate backing out. A Russell pole lap surviving. That is a story people can understand without reading the rulebook. And because they can understand it quickly, they can argue about it endlessly. That is why this controversy has so much retention power. Every layer opens another question. If Russell lifted, was it enough? If it was enough, why did Antonelli back out? If Antonelli backed out, did he overreact, or did Russell gamble? If Russell gambled, did Mercedes reward risk? If Mercedes rewards risk, what happens next time? If Ferrari pushes the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile to reopen the case, does that mean the first review missed something? And if the first review missed something, how many other yellow flag decisions have been too soft? That chain is the reason the story will not disappear. It is not one question. It is a ladder. And every step takes Mercedes into a more uncomfortable place. The most dangerous step is the internal one. Because Ferrari can pressure from the outside, but the bigger damage may happen inside Mercedes. Russell and Antonelli are supposed to be pushing the team forward together. That is the ideal version. Two fast drivers, one dominant car, maximum points, controlled rivalry.